respecting their vote and going to them. And I think that's the main downfall of the Republican Party, at least in the past 20 years. So, I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at that issue and reflect on how it is exactly that we might be able to, as conservatives, deliver our message and talk to blacks and Hispanics about why we really are the party of civil rights and why we are the party of opportunity, and to really define that. Now, I've played Rand Paul a number of times, and he was recently at Howard University, an all-black school, talking about this very issue, about the Republican Party, why the Republican Party is really the party of civil rights. And I thought that perhaps we could just listen to that talk. And I will tell you that if you have not heard it, and you did see a short story about it on the lamestream media, obviously it was slanted coverage, and you will see for yourself that the speech is very well delivered, that the message is very positive. And I have to be honest with you, here's another one that you really need to take a look at. You can go online and see this. Just jump onto YouTube and look for Rand Paul's speech at Howard University. He does have, a few people who kind of look at him, I would say, skeptically, but there are several shots of people who are really contemplating what he's saying, and I was happy to see that. There was, of course, one bonehead protester, which you'll hear as we play this, but overall, I think this speech was very, very well done, and I think that, as I mentioned, it really needs to be our strategy, because moving forward, we need to regain our nation. We need to reassure our constitutional rights, and obviously, as we just heard, we're definitely going in the wrong direction, and we have nobody to blame but ourselves. We keep voting in the wrong people, not only in the presidency but in Congress as well. We've given over our rights to our children and on the local levels, in our schools, for example. You notice how this is a whole other subject, but if you've ever had an issue with what your children are being taught, and you've ever called in or tried to address that issue, often you will get the response, but often you're treated as if you really don't have a lot to say in your child's upbringing. And I would have to point to the most recent commercials that MSNBC are putting on about you don't own your children, they are the property of the community, and all this BS. So I loved Sarah Palin's response, by the way. So that means your children are ours, so we can take them hunting after go to church in our pickup truck. So anyway, that was funny. But we're gonna take a listen to Rand Paul here as he speaks to Howard University students.
Thank you. I'd like to thank President Rabeau, former Mayor Smoke, and Howard University faculty and students for letting me come today. Now, some people have asked me, are you nervous about speaking at Howard? They say, some of the students there, they may be Democrats. So my response has been, you know what? The trip will be a success if I can get the Hilltop to have a headline that says, a Republican came to Howard, but he came in peace. My wife Kelly asked me last week, she said, do you ever have doubts? Do you ever have doubts about trying to advance a message for an entire country? The truth is, sometimes. When I do have doubts, I think of a line from T.S. Eliot, a line that says, how should I presume to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways And how should I presume? And when I think of how political enemies often twist and distort my positions, I think again of Eliot's words, and I think, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, how should I presume? And here I am today at Howard, a historically black college. Here I am, a guy who once presumed to discuss a section of the Civil Rights Act. That didn't always go so well for me. Some have said that I'm either brave or crazy to be here today. I've never been, though, one to sit by and watch the world go by without participating. I wake up every day hoping to make a difference. I take to heart the words of Toni Morrison of Howard University, who wrote, "If there is a book you really want to read that hasn't been written yet, then you must write it." Now, I can recite lots of books that have been written, or I can plunge into the arena and stumble, maybe fall, but at least I will have tried. What I'm about is a philosophy that leaves you to fill in the blanks. I came to Howard today not to preach or prescribe to you some special formula for you, but to say that I want a government that leaves you alone, that encourages you to write the book that becomes your future. You're more important than any political party, more important than any political pleadings or partisan pleadings. The most important thing you will do is yet to be seen. For me, I found my important thing to do when I learned to do surgery on the eye, when I learned to restore people's vision. I found what was important when I met my wife, when I got married. Many of you have those things that lay ahead of you. Although I'm an eye surgeon first and foremost, I find myself at this particular time in a debate over how we heal our sick economy and how we get people back to work. I truly believe that we have an economy that could create millions of jobs, but we have to rethink our arguments and try to rise above partisan rhetoric. My hope is that you'll hear me out, that you'll see me for who I am and not a caricature that's sometimes presented by political opponents. If you hear me out, I believe you'll discover that what motivates me more than any other issue is the defense of everyone's rights. Of strong importance to me is the defense of minority rights, not just racial minorities, but ideological and religious minorities. If our government does not protect the rights of minorities, then democratic majorities could simply legislate away our freedoms. The Bill of Rights and Civil War amendments protect us against the possibility of oppressive federal or state government. The fact that we are a constitutional republic means that certain inalienable rights are protected even from democratic majorities. The majority can't vote to take away your rights. They're yours. They're given to you by your Creator. No Republican questions or disputes civil rights. I've never wavered in my support for civil rights or the Civil Rights Act. The dispute, if there is one, has always been about how much of the remedy should come under federal or state or private purview. What gets lost is that the Republican Party has always been the party of civil rights and voting rights. Because Republicans believe that the federal government is limited, though, and that its function is limited by the Constitution, some have concluded that Republicans are somehow inherently insensitive to minority rights. Nothing could be further from the truth. Republicans do indeed still believe many rights remain with the people and the states respectively. When some people hear that, they tune us out and they say, oh, he's just using code words for states' rights to discriminate, for the states' rights to segregate and to abuse. But that's just simply not true. Many Republicans do believe that decentralization of power is the best policy, that government is more efficient, more just, and more personal when it's smaller and more local. But Republicans also realize that there are occasions, and have been occasions, of such egregious injustice that they do require federal involvement. That's precisely what the 14th Amendment was about, and what the Civil Rights Act was intended to do: protect citizens from state and local tyranny. The 14th Amendment says, no state shall. The 14th Amendment did change the Constitution to give a role for the federal government in protecting citizenship and voting, regardless of race. Now, I didn't live through segregation, nor did I experience it firsthand. I did grow up in the South, in public schools. I went to schools with whites, blacks, Latinos. We all seemed to pretty much get along. So perhaps some will say that I can't understand. But but I don't think you had to be there to be affected by our nation's history of racial strife. The tragedy of segregation and Jim Crow in the South is compounded when you realize that integration began in New England in 1840s and 1850s. In 1841, Frederick Douglass is pulled from the white car on the Eastern Railroad, clutching his seat so tightly that when he's thrown from the train, the remnants of the seat are still in his hands. But within a few years, public transportation was integrated in the Northeast. It's a stain on our history that integration didn't occur for more than 100 more years in the South. In the 1960s, we were still fighting to integrate transportation in schools, and that was and is an embarrassment. But the story of emancipation, of voting rights, and of citizenships from Frederick Douglass to the modern era is really, in fact, the history of the Republican Party. How did the party that elected the first black U.S. senator, the party that elected the first 20 African-American congressmen, how did that party become a party that now loses 95% of the black vote? How did the Republican Party, the party of the great emancipator, lose the trust and faith of an entire race? From the Civil War to the Civil Rights Movement, for a century, most black Americans voted Republican. How did we lose that vote? To understand how Republicans lost the African American vote, we must first understand how we won the African American vote. In Kentucky, the history of black voting rights is inseparable from the Republican Party. After the Civil War, virtually all African Americans became Republicans. Democrats in Louisville were led by the Courier-Journal editor, Henry Watterson, and they were implacably opposed to blacks voting. The Democrats, to a person, were opposed to blacks voting. Watterson himself, who was the editor for 30 or 40 years of the Courier-Journal, wrote that his opposition to blacks voting was founded upon the conviction that their habits of life and general condition disqualified them from the judicious exercise of suffrage. This was the Democrats. In George Wright's Life Behind the Veil, he writes of Republican General John Palmer standing before tens of thousands of slaves on July 4th, 1865, when slavery still existed in Kentucky, and declaring, "My countrymen, you are free, and while I command the military forces of the United States, will defend your right to freedom." And the crowd erupted in cheers. This is the history of the Republican Party. Meanwhile, Kentucky's Democrat-controlled legislature voted against the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th Amendments. In Louisville, William Worley was a black Republican. He was born at the end of the 19th century. He was a founder of Louisville's NAACP. He's a Republican. Most of the founders of the NAACP were Republicans. He's famous, though, for fighting and overturning the notorious Louisville segregated housing ordinance. Worley bought a house in a white section in defiance of a city segregation law. The case, Buchanan v. Worley, was finally decided by the Supreme Court in 1917, unanimously holding that the Kentucky law could not forbid the sale of a house based on race. The Republican Party's history is rich and chock full of emancipation and black history. Republicans still prize the sense of justice that MLK spoke of when he said that an unjust law is any law that a majority enforces on a minority but does not make binding upon itself. I wasn't sure if my speech would be entertaining, but now you've had some entertainment. When MLK talked about an unjust law, what always has intrigued me about this is a lot of the things MLK talked about were race, but really what he talked about when he talked about what was a just law goes beyond race. So listen to this again. He said that an unjust law, and this is a good way to look at any law, an unjust law is any law that a majority, not just a racial majority, any majority, enforces on a minority, but does not make binding on themselves. It means any law that's not universally applied. Any law that applies to just bankers would be not racist, but would be unjust. Any law that just applied to one particular group would be unjust. Now, he was referring to race, but he said something about unjustness that applies to all law. Republicans have never stopped believing that minorities, whether they derive from the